I never thought my little lake cabin would turn into a stage for a full-blown soap opera. Honestly, I bought the place to escape drama, not to star in it, but 3 weeks after I hung that welcome mat, I was living through a chapter that felt ripped from one of those true crime miniseries, only somehow more pathetic, and if I'm honest, a little hilarious. I mean me, a rule-following, tax-paying, lawn-mowing kind of person caught in the crosshairs of a woman who treated our quiet neighborhood like a monarchy, and who apparently kept an ancient HOA bylaw like a medieval sword. That's the hook if you want to stick around. I promise there's a good payoff. It began small, so small you'd laugh if I told you, except it wasn't funny in the moment. The mailbox was first. Half an inch, that's all it took. Half an inch to the left, and suddenly I was a scofflaw. Then the welcome mat, bright welcoming, donated by my friend, was apparently an affront to someone's idea of civic decorum. Passive-aggressive notes started appearing on my door like seasonal mail, folded and scrawled with the kind of righteous punctuation that reads, "I am correcting you and I enjoy it." I'm not proud to say I spent several evenings pacing the porch, cataloging infractions like a neurotic collector. Plants too tall, grill cover a shade too wrinkled, a towel hung over the railing improperly. I tried to be neighborly, really, I did. I'd smile, hand out a cookie fix, whatever tiny thing was pointed out, and it would stop for a day, maybe two, before the next note arrived like a little paper grenade. The woman, let's call her Karen, because that's what she felt like, was a self-appointed sheriff, jury, and moral beacon. She'd patrol the cul-de-sac in a way that suggested she'd practiced her glare in the mirror. I tried reasoning at first, because that's what I do. I like solutions. But Karen didn't want solutions, she wanted power. She wanted the ability to make people feel small, to declare punishments with a sticky note. So when I finally decided to build a small private dock, a simple, sensible dock permitted by county and state, the sort of thing that made sense for a lake cabin, she became theatrical. I didn't rush into construction. I'm not that kind of person. I spent months getting the right permits, signatures, environmental approval, stacks of paperwork that could have been used as insulation. I hired a reputable contractor who smelled vaguely of motor oil and knew how to read tide lines. We started on a bright morning, the kind of day the lake wears like a mirror, perfectly calm, and the first post slid into the water. That should have been it. Instead, the second the post hit the water, Karen went ballistic. She showed up with a clipboard like a crusader and a set of bylaws that looked like they were printed the same year disco died. "Your dock is an inch too long," she announced to the workers, as if that inch was a moral failing. She began leaving threatening notices on my door, formal typed, topped with the HOA seal, as if letterhead could conjure law. The HOA will have this torn down, one read in a font that I still hate. I tried to talk to her, hand her the county permits, the environmental approvals. She waved them like confetti. "County permits don't matter here," she said with the serene certainty of someone who believes she is literally the law. "I am the law here." The right thing to do at that moment was probably to breathe and let the county handle it. But in the slow erosion of peace and patience, I'd become something I didn't like: angry, tense, defensive. This place was supposed to be my sanctuary, not a small-town courtroom. So when the notices ramped up and the passive-aggressive escalated to outright harassment notes left on my car, neighbors tipped off a formal complaint filed with an unnecessary zeal. I decided to get legal advice. Not just any advice. I wanted someone who could cut through the theatrics. A friend introduced me to a lawyer named Davies, Mr. Davies when you wanted to be polite. The kind of name that sounded like he probably had a gravelly baritone and a cape in his closet. He wasn't the cape type, but he was exactly the kind of calm, seasoned professional you picture in these stories. Calm, meticulous, quietly confident. He agreed to come out to the cabin to review my stack of permits, because why not meet at the scene? It felt right to have the paperwork sprawled across my kitchen table, the sunlight cutting across blueprints like a director's spotlight. For the first time in weeks, there was a sliver of hope that maybe this would end with a bureaucratic sigh and a polite letter telling Karen to mind her own business. We were mid-discussion, tracing property lines and debating screw gauges, when something happened that turned the whole thing on its head. First, it was a noise, no polite knocking, just a frantic banging at the front door. My heart gave a jump, because by then I was used to unexpected notes, but not this. The door opened, and there she was, Karen, phone held up, recording like a journalist on a mission. She didn't even see Mr. Davies right away. Her eyes were fixed on me, the righteous fury of someone who had been trained to believe every petty crusade was an act of heroism. "I'm documenting this for the HOA," she shrieked like someone who'd come prepared with a script. "You're doing unapproved construction. You are going down." Her camera swept around the kitchen, the blueprints, the coffee cups, and then it landed on Mr. Davies. I could feel my stomach drop, because this was the sort of scene I'd seen in movies where everything goes sideways. Only it didn't go the way a movie normally goes. Mr. Davies didn't rise to the bait. He set his coffee down, folded his hands, and in a voice that could have calmed a riot, he asked a very simple question. "Ma'am, who are you? And did you just enter this man's private property without permission?" The question was small, but the consequences were large because Karen had crossed a line she'd tried 1,000 times to blur. Her face changed in a way that was almost cinematic, the flush of superiority sliding off like a cheap paint job. She stammered about the HOA, about rules, about her right to record. And then the twist. Mr. Davies stood slow and deliberate and pulled his badge from his jacket pocket. Not some fake little prop, an actual badge. "State attorney," he said. And the room seemed to inhale. Everything in me wanted to laugh. How often do you get state-level theatrics at your kitchen table? But the laughter died because the power on the other side of that badge was real. He told her in that low, measured tone that carries law with it that she had trespassed, and that recording someone inside their home without consent could be evidence of a crime. He explained without malice exactly what she'd just done. Broken and entering harassment, creating illegal recordings, words that made her phone go from a weapon to a liability in the blink of an eye. There was a palpable shift, like when the tide turns and every little boat suddenly points the same way. Karen, who had spent months sharpening her small business of intimidation, lost her footing. She muttered apologies, tried to delete the footage, but Mr. Davies, with the patience of someone who'd watched this movie before, told her she could either leave and consider her role in the community or stay and explain herself to the sheriff. She chose the welcome mat route, backpedaled so hard she nearly tripped over the very thing she'd once mocked. After she stormed away, the cabin went quiet in that clean way only a space does after a storm. I remember sitting down and laughing, an ugly, relieved sound that felt too big for my chest. Mr. Davies sat back like a man settling into his favorite chair, and we finished going over the blueprints like nothing at all had happened, as if the interruption had been a weird commercial break. He told me he'd file a cease and desist if the harassment continued, and implied very clearly that the law had teeth, not just HOA notices, but real consequences. The town slowly, gloriously breathed again. Karen's notes stopped. The mailbox offense was resigned to the past. The dock was finished without a single more peep. The water lapped gently against the pilings as if nature itself approved of our small victory. For the first time in months, my cabin felt like a refuge, scent of pine, sound of distant loons' boards creaking in a way that made me smile instead of flinch. But this story isn't just about seeing a bully get embarrassed. The twist wasn't that Mr. Davies had a badge that was cinematic, sure, but the bigger twist was how easily power can be confused with righteousness. Karen believed deeply that her rules saved the neighborhood. What she didn't understand was that power without accountability is just cruelty in a cardigan. And I learned in an unexpected, slightly humiliating way that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean punching first. Sometimes it means finding the person who carries authority you can't manufacture and letting them speak the language of consequences. There's a moral here, but it isn't a neat bumper sticker. It landed on me like the cool evening air. After a long, hot day, vigilance matters, community matters, but so does humility. We have rules to live by, but what protects our liberty isn't the notes nailed to doors, it's the idea that the law applies to everyone, even to the folks who think they invented it. If you let petty power go unchecked, it expands. It finds new rules to wrap itself around. And if you don't stand up, if you let pettiness calcify, those small injustices become the architecture of your life. The satisfying part, I'll admit, was watching the bully retreat, karma, if you like. She tried to weaponize the HOA and got a legal reality check, public, swift, and oddly theatrical. Justice felt tidy that day. The dock stayed. The peace returned. I took the first canoe out at dawn, the water glass smooth, the world very, very quiet except for my oar slicing through. I felt light in a way I hadn't since I'd signed the papers and dreamed about this place. That was the release, the sense that fairness, slow and messy, sometimes driven by paperwork and people in badges, had prevailed. But I won't pretend the lesson was all sunshine. I also learned to watch myself, to question where anger fastens itself, and why I let a stranger make me feel small. The real victory wasn't in humiliating Karen, it was in reclaiming the calm I'd paid for, in choosing not to be roped into performing outrage like some kind of civic theater. That's the quiet wisdom the cabin gave me, a reminder that sometimes power needs to be countered with procedure, not passion. So here's the question I want to leave you with, because I love a good argument. As much as the next person, when someone uses rules to bully others, is the right response, always to call the law? Or are there moments when community reconciliation and honest conversation over coffee would have been better? In my case, the law worked and I slept again. But what if the badge hadn't been in his pocket? What if the scales had tipped the other way? Where do we draw the line between protecting ourselves and punishing someone for being small? Tell me, what would you have done? Have you ever had a petty tyrant in your neighborhood or a situation where rules became a weapon? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me what felt right or what backfired. And if this made you feel anything vindicated, furious, or just entertained, share it with someone who needs a little reminder that sometimes justice looks like paperwork and patience.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.